This yin yoga sequence mainly works the spine, so after a brief warm-up, the sequence will include melting heart posture, saddle pose, some supine twists, eye of the needle, and caterpillar pose. Props that are always useful, a couple blankets, a couple pillows, a few books, and even a couch cushion could in general be useful. So cultivate your intention for practice. Maybe gather up a few props and we'll get started. So the practice begins by sitting back on one heels. And so you can do this without any props, but if sitting back on your heels doesn't work for you and you need a little bit of height, to notice I just sat on a pile of books and I've got this blanket for my knees. You can use as many books as you need to get up high enough to where this is possible. But if this doesn't work for you at all, then find another comfortable seat. It can be cross-legged, it could be sitting in a chair, but you need some space around you for this first exercise. So this breathing exercise is the kriya known as circle of life, and we'll do 4 cycles of these. So this first one is to just get rooted in your lower body. Feel stable here. So again, you have to find a seat where you feel stable here. Maybe grow your spine long, roll your shoulders up and back just for a moment to create space in your torso so you can breathe here. And feel your breath. So notice a few inhales and exhales. No special breathing yet, just your own natural breath. And then maybe just notice other sensations inside your body right now, just to bring yourself into the present moment. So maybe one more breath here. We'll start the kriya here. So you start out with hands together in front of your heart. And then on your next inhale, sweep your arms forward and up towards the ceiling here. And then as you exhale, make a big sweeping circle with your hands behind your torso. And then interlace your fingers, and then roll your shoulders back, extend your arms long here. And if you can't find your hands, then just kind of fake it here a little bit. And then reach your sternum up towards the ceiling. So we're doing a little bit of a mini back bend. If it's okay with your head and your neck, you can look up. If that's creating too much strain on your neck, then just keep your head neutral here. And then that was on an inhale, and then on your exhale, sweep your hands around, back to heart center. So we'll do this cycle 3 more times. Inhale, arms come up towards the ceiling, reach up. Exhale, sweep your arms back. Clasp your hands, extend your arms behind you. Inhale, lift your chest up towards the ceiling. Exhale, release your hands and bring them back to heart center. So 2 more times. Inhale, sweep your arms up towards the ceiling. Exhale, sweep them back and around. Inhale, mini back bend here. Exhale, hands come back to heart center. Just 1 more cycle here. Inhale, arms come up. Exhale, arms sweep back. Inhale, the mini back bend here. Exhale, hands to heart center. And when they return to heart center, for a moment, for 2, 3, 4 breaths here, just allow yourself to notice in stillness how this feels. 1 more breath. And then from here, if you were sitting on books like I was, come up off of your books. Take them off to the side, kind of clear your mat out. We're coming into a wide-legged child's pose. So the first thing to do here is to come to hands and knees. And then when you get there, bring your knees about met width apart. Maybe feet come closer together, so maybe the toes almost touch. And then let your hips sink back towards your heels as far as they go until they stop for you. When that happens, then lower your torso forward. Extend your arms forward. So as long as they go here, until everything stops. Find your stopping point here. And then stay here for a breath or 2. We'll add a lateral bend to this. So on your next inhale, root through your hands and your arms, lift your torso up just a little bit, and then start walking yourself over to the right side to create a lateral bend in your torso to open up through this left side. So you go over until you stop. You soften, you settle, and then maybe you go over a little bit more. Maybe take a couple more breaths to soften and settle. And really notice and feel how this left side is open. You can actually feel your breath moving into the open space on the left side of your rib cage. One more breath here. And then gently walk yourself back to center. Maybe pause in center. Now we're moving over to the other side. So moving over to the left, now we're opening up through this right side here. So when you feel that first point of resistance, soften and settle here for a moment. And then see if you can go a little bit farther here. And then let everything kind of sink. Muscles are softening. Maybe 2 more breaths here on this side. And then at some point bring yourself back to center and make your way up onto hands and knees. So that was the warm-up. The first real yin posture, the one we'll hold for a while, is a posture known in yin as melting heart. I like the name melting heart. It has a more common name in Western posture practice, and it's known mainly as puppy pose. But I like the name melting heart because it really does feel that that's what you're trying to do. So you'll come onto all fours, and if your knees don't like being on all fours, you can always put extra padding underneath your knees. So you can put a little bit of a blanket or something underneath your knees. And then from here, melting heart pose is you start walking your hands and arms forward and lower your sternum towards the ground, so you're melting your heart to the ground. So your lower body's kind of staying exactly where it is. It's not moving much. By the way, if your lower body is not stable, then rearrange feet, legs, knees, whatever you need to make a stable platform there. And then allow your heart to melt. So the idea with this posture is you're creating traction in your shoulders and in your upper back. You're reversing the shear force in your upper spine here. And we can feel this. We can feel this as a lot of like pressure, tightness here. And that's the point to this posture. So that's what we're trying to feel. And you can experiment with moving your arms around. Maybe this doesn't work. Maybe your head is being uncomfortably driven into the floor. Or maybe you're feeling pinching in the arms, so maybe the arms need to be rearranged here. If it's your head that's an issue in this posture, then you can take some books and use books to place underneath your elbows so that you create a space for your head. I'm just using one book here, but you can use a stack of books, as many as you need to. And now I have a little bit more space for my head here, now that my elbows are up on books here. So this is an alternative form of doing melting heart. And once you've found your pose, you'll stay there for a while. Now, for some of us, melting heart might not work, particularly if our shoulders are injured or a little bit too sensitive. But we do want to get the pressure up in the upper back. There is an alternative to melting heart that you can do. It's called a heart opener on books. And what you can do is create a little bit of a tower with a couple of books. And you'll actually lay back on it. So I'm going to use 2 books here. And then I'll use another book and maybe a pillow for my head. And then I'll come over and I'll lay back on the book so that the books are underneath my upper spine here. Not my lumbar, not my shoulders, but my thoracic spine, the spine that has ribs coming out of it. And then this last book and this pillow are just meant for my head here. And if I'm not feeling enough pressure and I would like a little more, it just means I need to add another book or 2 underneath my torso here. And then relax my legs, relax my arms, let my shoulders just droop forward. So I'm not getting any pressure in my shoulders here right now. So they're not feeling any traction or pressure or stress. I'm getting it in my upper spine. But if it saves my shoulders from being injured, there's always a good alternative then from full melting heart posture. But if melting heart works for you, you can stay in melting heart. We'll stay here for about 1 more minute or so in this posture. So you can choose what variation works the best for you, and then you can hang out for a few more breaths, maybe 6 or 7. So in yin, the idea is you find your edge first, and your edge is that place where your body stops and you start to feel sensation. So feeling sensation is not meant to be injurious or traumatic or painful. So if you're feeling sharp, biting, burning sensations in any shape you create, that's not the point to the posture. You need to find a modification that fits your body here. Second principle is once you've found a shape that fits your body, then you stay here for a while. This is called stillness. Now, stillness doesn't necessarily mean you have to be completely still. Maybe hands, maybe feet, maybe head needs to be rearranged to find a better seat here. And then lastly, you stay for time. So that's time. Staying for time is really what makes yin yoga yin yoga. It's the idea of relaxing your muscle fiber and then just hanging out here. So maybe 1 or 2 more breaths here and melting hard. And then we'll come out. So activate your hands, use your hands and your arms to press yourself up. Maybe come back up into table pose. And then from here, make your way back into child's pose again. It can be wide-legged child's pose, or it can be child's pose with knees together. You can do child's pose with your torso down, arms extended out in front of you, but if you actually held melting heart pose for all 3 minutes and your shoulders are a little bit achy, one suggestion I have is reach your arms back alongside your torso. Let your shoulders droop forward in the opposite direction. Just see how that feels here for a couple of breaths or so. And then when you're ready, you can bring yourself up to seated. And then when you get to seated, we'll get ready for the next yin posture. And the next yin posture is saddle pose. So I'll demonstrate saddle pose, but saddle pose sometimes isn't for everyone. If that's the case with you, then Sphinx is an option. And I'll demonstrate Sphinx after I demonstrate saddle. But first, saddle. So for saddle, you'll start out sitting on your heels again, just like we did at the beginning of practice here. Again, if this is not working for you, then probably Sphinx is going to be your option here. You can also sit in between your heels. You can also sit on a little bit of height, if that helps to mitigate the pressure in the knees and in the ankles. You can also put extra blankets under here. Sometimes some height behind you is handy. So this is where the handy couch cushion comes into effect here. So you can place the couch cushion here, or you can use a system of pillows and blankets here. And the idea to saddle here is you can either stay sitting straight up, or you start to slowly lower yourself back, just as far as you go here. So maybe you don't make it very far until the sensations are telling you that this is as far as you go. So you're moving by feel. Move slowly and deliberately so you don't pass your edge. You don't move yourself into pain. So maybe this is as far as I go today. Or maybe I'm fine here. I can go a little bit farther. Maybe I make it all the way down onto my prop, onto my couch cushion here. So this is saddle. And the idea is, no matter how intense this is, you're trying to watch your breath, listen to your inner landscape here, and just notice what you're feeling, and just reside in the present moment of the posture. I know it won't last forever. A few minutes seems to be a very long time, but in the grand scheme of things, a few minutes will be up before you know it here. Otherwise, if you're in pain, then all you're doing in this posture is hurting yourself. So it's time to find an alternative. So bring yourself out of that painful posture and do something more constructive. And the more constructive posture might be Sphinx pose. So you'll make your way out of this posture. Maybe you make your way all the way onto your belly. Legs comfortably extended out behind you, and then bring your elbows underneath your shoulders, shoulder width apart. And if you don't know what shoulder width apart is, clasp your elbows. And try to bone stack your upper arms so that you can just rest your torso and relax the rest of your torso. Let it just sag due to gravity here. This is a simple back bend here. It's simple, not necessarily easy. So the idea is we're trying to compress the low spine to the point where it's painful, but just to where we can feel it here. Several things you can do with your head. You can hold your head up. You can let your head hang. You can keep your head neutral. You can put a prop underneath your head and use a prop to kind of just hold your head up here in Sphinx. So what Sphinx and saddle both have in common is they're both back bends. That's why Sphinx is the alternative to saddle. As it is, Sphinx or saddle, we only have about a minute left in this posture. So you can stay in Sphinx, or if you're in saddle, then if you're in pain, come out of saddle. If you're not in pain, then maybe try to stay just a little while longer here in saddle. And notice where the pressure is. So that's where the most intense physical sensations are. This is where we start in a yoga practice, is we try to notice the most obvious things. And in a Western posture practice, a physical practice, it's usually the physical sensations that they are most intense. Sometimes it's the mental, emotional sensations. We need to pay attention to them too. But we're looking for the most obvious. Once we have a handle on that, then we look for the more subtle sensations. Much like looking at the night sky and getting to learn the stars, one maybe is better off starting out with trying to find the most obvious stars, the brightest stars, the most common stars, the most famous stars. And then as one gets familiar with those, one can decide to look at more subtle stars here. So just one more breath here. If you're in Sphinx, slower yourself down. If you're in saddle, you can never remember how to get out of saddle pose. So maybe plant your hands on the ground, kind of grunt and groan, and slowly bring yourself up out of saddle. Now your legs have been deeply flexed for the past few postures, so you probably want to extend them out. You can do this in a simple way by just coming to hands and knees and slowly extending one out at a time. One counter pose that's a little bit more intense is a forearm plank pose. So you come down on your elbows on your forearms and extend one leg out, extend the other leg out. Engage your core and let your body be kind of stiff. So this is a yang posture. This is the opposite of yin. And you stay here for a few breaths just to extend your legs out. You can make maybe little motions. You can rock your hips from side to side or back and forth here. If this is too painful, you can always do this just with your knees down. So maybe a couple more breaths here. And then slowly bring yourself out of that forearm plank pose. The next long held yin posture is basically a supine twist. So we'll end up laying on our backs for this posture. Legs comfortably extended out in front of you. And then bend your right knee, bring your right knee in towards your torso. Maybe give your right knee a hug. say, hello, right knee. You can hug it behind the thigh if in front of the shin creates pain here. And then from here, take the right knee in your left hand. Right hand comes out like an outrigger position. Maybe shift your hips over to the right an inch or two to make it easier to stack the hips. And then bring that whole right leg over the left leg here until it stops, wherever that is for you. This is supposed to be a spinal twist. So upper body is trying to melt back towards the right. Maybe it makes it to the floor. It doesn't have to. It just needs to stop somewhere. Now, if this knee is floating and that's creating instability, then take a prop. I've got a handy couch cushion here. Just put that prop underneath that knee. Now, if it's floating and not hurting, then it can just float here. Head can stay neutral, but if you want a complete twist in your spine, and it's okay with your neck, then you can turn your head away from your knee, in which case look down that right arm, and then you have a complete twist going on in your spine, all the way from your tailbone up to the crown of your head. If this creates too much strain in your head, then maybe just look up towards the ceiling. Some variations on this posture is you can bend both knees. Maybe the straight leg is bothering you, and both knees can be bent here. Maybe you need an additional prop underneath a floating shoulder. Otherwise, find your twist, find your shape, find your edge, someplace where the physical sensations, the holistic experience of the posture is something that are appropriate and acceptable to you. Soften your muscle fiber and then just reside here for a while. So one of the most famous constellations in the sky, one of the most famous asterisms, is a constellation known as Ursa Major. It's in the northern sky, can only be seen in the northern hemisphere. So if you live in the northern hemisphere, then you may have heard of it. It's usually the first batch of stars that get pointed out to us as children. So probably most of us have heard of it, but not everyone. One of the reasons it's so famous is because it's bright and very distinguishable. And particularly in the month of May, which is the month this video is being recorded. Ursa Major is high in the sky. So it's high overhead right after evening sunset, so around 9, 10, 10:30. If you look up, you'll see this constellation. It's upside down from how it's normally represented. But it's made up of 7 very bright stars in the main asterism of the constellation. And in North America, in Canada, and in the US, it's known as the Big Dipper. Now in other parts of the world, it's known as other things. It's in the UK, it's known as the Plough. In Western Europe, it's known as the Wagon. Other cultures have different meanings for it here. But it is made up of a nice, distinguishable asterism of 7 stars. There's more than 7 stars in it. These are the bright stars that are obvious to you, sure. So about 5 more breaths here in this twist. Unless, of course, it's getting painful, in which case, since yin is a very allowing practice, you allow yourself to come out whenever your body is done with the practice, rather than your ego telling you that you have to stay in the posture. It's been the constellation, the Big Dipper, Ursa Major. Ursa Major, by the way, is Latin for the Great Bear. Is an asterism that has been known since before prehistory. Because of that, even though Ursa Major means the Great Bear, and for many cultures where that term originated, it was seen as a bear, a female bear, by the way, and her cub is the Little Dipper. There's not a lot of definitive stories about it, simply because if there were, they came from oral traditions that predated writing. And so you can find all kinds of stories about the Big Dipper, none of them terribly consistent, because of course people have been telling stories about the Great Bear constellation for tens of thousands of years. Just one more breath here. And then when you're ready, bring that knee up. Oh ho ho. If you've been here for a while, you can maybe feel the reverberation. So maybe a good counterpose for this is what I call waterfall. Bend both knees, put your feet on the floor, and then lift them up off the floor. Extend your legs up towards the ceiling. Grow your legs long here. And maybe reach behind your thighs with your hands, clasp your thighs, and maybe and flex your feet a few times. Just try to cultivate a nice neutral torso lying on the ground after that twist, and let your legs extend, since we did a lot of leg flexion here earlier in the practice. And then we have the other side of the twist to do, so bring your feet back down to the ground. Extend your right leg long, left knee is bent, and then draw the left knee into your torso. You can give the left knee a hug, and then maybe shift your hips over to the left a little bit, because we're going to move that knee over to the right. So clasp the knee with your right hand, left arm extends out to the left, and then draw that left knee over to the right side as far as it goes until it stops here for you. For some of you, knee's going to make it easily to the ground. Other people, the knee will float, and there's no sensation in the knee. And if there isn't, then it can just float. Torso, left shoulder needs to melt back towards the left so that the spine is actually twisting here. You might have to support that left shoulder with a pillow or a blanket. Head can stay neutral. If you're wanting that complete twist and it's okay with the neck, you can turn your head away and kind of look down your left arm here. Whatever you choose, find your shape. We'll stay here a few more minutes, so another 3 minutes here in this twist here. The ancients often saw the constellations sometimes as a single star, and indeed one of the stars in the dipper part of the Big Dipper, not the handle, but the 4 stars in the cup. Its name is Dubi, and that's Arabic for bear. So that star is literally named Bear for the Big Bear star. So it's kind of the flagship star for the Big Dipper. It and another star, the other star below it, or in this case above it, when it's overhead and upside down, is a star known as Merak. So Merak and Deneb, very important stars because they're known as pointer stars. They essentially point to the North Star. This is one reason why the Big Dipper is so famous, because not only is it bright and easy to identify, but it's helpful. It's an extremely helpful asterism of stars. Now, Dubi, the star itself, is actually a yellow giant star, so it's nearing the end of its life, and it's about 123 light years away. So it's quite a bit bigger than the sun. It's about 4 times as massive as the sun. It's 300 times as luminous as the sun. And it's kind of at a moderate distance from us. So stars are usually bright because they're close or because they're big. The Dubi is bright because of a little bit of both. It's not really that far away. It's not really that close either. But it is a big star. It's a bright star. But it's off by itself. And that's usually the case for most stars and constellations. So even though they look like they're right next to each other in the sky, if you add the distance factor in, most stars are different distances from us. So they look close together in the sky. They're actually not in most constellations. Dubi just happens to be close to the other stars. It's not really close in space, it's just kind of adjacent to the other stars. However, most of the other stars in the Big Dipper are actually close to each other. They're actually related. and associated with each other. 5 more breaths here in this twist, if this is okay. Maybe refine your edge. If you're not feeling anything, then see if you can lower that knee a little bit more. Feeling too much, back yourself off. So 5 of the bright stars, of the 7 stars in the Big Dipper, are part of what's known as the Ursa Major moving group. And what that means is astronomers have discovered that most of the stars are of the same type, they're the same age, and they're all moving in the same direction. What this means is most likely they all formed in the same spot out of the same primordial cloud of gas and dust. And now they're kind of young stars. They're all A-type stars. They're about 10 million years old, so pretty young, and they're starting to just kind of move away from each other. So they were part of a true cluster. And just one more breath here in this twist. And then on your next inhale, and bring the knee back up to center. Unwind from the twist, maybe make a little bit of wiggles to work out the kinks that develop during that twist. You can do waterfall pose again for a counter pose. Again, wiggle your feet around here. You can even wiggle the legs around here. And maybe for a moment, just relax and extend everything along the floor, almost in a mini shavasana here. Just lie here for a couple of breaths and notice the rebound from the twist here. When you're feeling ready to move again, you can bend your knees and then maybe do a few kind of subtle windshield wipers. The next yin posture is known as I have the needle pose, is what I call it, although it has a half a dozen other names. Sometimes it's called reclined pigeon, sometimes it's called figure 4. But this is the hip opener, so we're taking a break from all the spinal work. Lying comfortably with your torso on the ground, both knees bent. Then bring your left knee in towards your torso. Maybe take your hands, clasp them behind the thigh, and then take your left ankle and place it on your right thigh. Just notice how this configuration feels. If it already creates a lot of pressure in your hips, then this is a good place to stay. You can just stay here. Otherwise, the next step to this posture is draw this right leg in towards your torso. You can clasp your hands around the right thigh to just hold it in place, or you can clasp it around the front of the right shin if that feels okay, and that's okay out with your knee here. So this is eye of the needle, this classic runner's stretch here. And you can be a little bit yang in your arms. You can tug and pull that right leg in until you're feeling as much as you want to feel in this posture. And this is the posture. So you just stay here nice and comfortable. Maybe you want to put a pillow underneath your head to just stay nice and comfy here. So we'll stay here a few minutes here. If you're wanting something way more intense than this posture, then you can do sleeping swan. So sleeping swan is slowly come out of this posture. Make your way on the hands and knees. Bring the left foot up between your hands. Work it over to the right side of the mat. Extend the right leg back. Maybe walk that right knee back. Let your hips sink, and you can stay up in swan here, or you slowly lower your torso down into swan here. So this is a regular part of your practice. You can do this hip opener instead here. But if you're feeling something in eye of the needle, maybe just stick with that for this practice here. So we'll stay here for a couple more minutes in eye of the needle. Remember, it's stillness and time that does the work in yin yoga. So the 5 stars that are actually part of the same cluster, or suspected to be part of the same cluster, are the stars Murak and Megrez and Phecda, and a star called Alioth and Mizar. Now, Alioth and Mizar are 2 of the 3 stars in the handle. So those 3 bright characteristic handle stars here. And in fact, Of all the stars in the Big Dipper, probably the most famous one is Mizar. And the reason why Mizar is the most famous one, not because it's the brightest, but because it has a small companion next to it called Alcor. So on a very dark night, anyone that has fairly good eyesight, you can see that Mizar is actually two stars. And the little star is called Alcor, so it's Mizar and Alcor. Now it turns out Mizar has another companion next to it. And so it's another binary. So Mizar itself is still a binary system. Turns out Alcor is a binary system, so Alcor is actually two stars as well. Turns out the stars in the Mizar binary system are all binaries themselves. So it just keeps going and going. And so Mizar is actually a complex of at least 6 stars. Even though to normal eyesight person, we can only see Alcor. So it only looks like 2. And then finally, at the end of the handle, the brightest star is Alkaid. Alkaid is not part of the moving group. It's like Dooby. It's kind of its own star in its own right. It's another pretty big star. And it's 100 light years away. By the way, the stars in the moving group are only about 70, 80 light years away, so they're much closer, much smaller stars. And so Alkaid, another bright star, all by itself, not associated with the rest of the stars in the Big Dipper. And they just happen to arrange themselves to be very useful to us, because they're very recognizable. The ancients recognize them. The most common form or stories that the ancients from Western Europe and Eastern Asia talked about was the Great Bear, although you can find infinite number of traditions talking about other things that made stories about those bright stars. So here in North America, Native Americans of the Great Plains, they had their own stories for those stars, several different stories, and the Cheyenne tribe of the Great Plains told a story about a young woman, a single daughter in a family who had the ability of magical vision, and she often had dreams that she had 7 brothers that she never met, and she was very good at making clothing, so she made clothing for these 7 brothers that didn't seem to exist here. Just one more breath on this side, and then go ahead and release Eye of the Needle. You can come out of Sleeping Swan slowly, start working the kinks here. So a good counter pose for Eye of the Needle is called Reclined Windshield Wipers. Bend your knees, put your feet on the floor, bring your feet wide apart, so maybe mat width. Right foot finds the right edge of the yoga mat, left foot finds the left edge of the yoga mat. And then very slowly just begin to bob your knees back and forth from side to side. And then at some point, bring your feet hip width apart again, into the other side. So this time it's draw the right knee in, bring the right heel on up to rest on the left thigh. Right knee is bent and out wide. Decide if you want to stay here with the left foot on the ground, or if you want to draw that left leg in. Either clasp your hands behind the left thigh or in front of the left shin. Draw the leg in until you're feeling a stopping point or some pressure. But if you're not feeling as much as you would like to, and you like more intense hip openers, feel free to substitute something a little bit more intense, like Sleeping Swan or Square Pose here. Otherwise, if you're feeling it, you're doing it. So all that needs to happen in this yoga practice. So there's some resistance and pressure there. And that's all you really need here. We'll stay here for a few more minutes on this side. One day the young daughter awoke and she realized she needed to travel north to find her brothers. So she traveled north for several days, bringing all the clothes that she had made with her. And at some point, when she reached the end of the prairie and she was on the edge of great wood, great spruce trees in the north, she saw a teepee. And from the teepee, a very young boy comes running out. youngest of the 7 brothers. And he had the magical gift of vision too. And he saw his sister coming and he said, I knew you would come someday. And so she gave the clothing that she made for him. And then she went into the teepee and she laid out all of the clothing that she had made for the other 6 brothers, who, by the way, were gone hunting. When the older brothers returned, they were amazed at their younger sister that had finally showed up after all of these years. They didn't know they had a sister, but their youngest one, he kept telling them, we have a sister and she will come, and she finally came here. Soon after this occurred, a bison showed up. And the bison said, I speak for the Buffalo Nation, and we've heard you've gained a sister. We want her. Give her to us now, or we will come and we will kill you. And the brothers said, no, we're not giving up our sister. So the next day, a bigger bison showed up and said, we have come for your new sister. And again, the brothers refused to give their new sister to them. So on the 3rd day, the whole bison herd showed up. And they said, if you do not give us your sister, we will kill you. And so the older brothers talked to the younger brother, and they said to the youngest, the small boy, they said, we know you have magical powers, so you can save us from this. So the young boy takes his bow and arrow and he shoots an arrow up into the air. And a great tree grows and follows the arrow. So all the brothers and the sister, they climb the tree. And the buffaloes are at the base, and the buffaloes are hitting the tree, trying to knock it over. And the brothers say, quick, save us again. And so the young boy shoots another arrow up into space. The tree continues to grow until it's as high as the stars themselves. And when they're all safe among the star world, they all hop off and become stars themselves. So just a couple more breaths here on this side of Eye of the Needle. And indeed, you can still see the 7 brothers there. In fact, there's the 7 brothers, there's actually the 6 older brothers, and then the sister. And next to the sister is the young boy, the young magical boy that saved them. This is Major in Alcor. That was a traditional story from the Cheyenne tribe. One more breath here, and then you can release Eye of the Needle. Come out of it slowly, or come out of Sleeping Swans slowly here. And then maybe set yourself up for another round of reclined windshield wipers. Just something to kind of release the pressure, loosen up the hip sockets, maybe just 2 or 3 cycles. And then at some point, gently roll over to your side. Bring yourself up to seated. And then from seated, the next yin posture, this is known as caterpillar pose. Caterpillar pose is just extended leg forward fold. It's the yin version here. Now, if you have a lot of tightness in your back body like I do, it's a really good idea to sit up on some height. So you can create some height with a few books here. Take a couple of books just to raise your sits bones, your hips, your pelvic bone off of the ground a few inches here. And then, again, if there's a lot of tightness in the bottoms of your legs, you can place a rolled up blanket, where I'm using a pillow here, and place a pillow underneath your knees so your knees can be soft. For a moment, do a little bit of jong work here, make your spine nice and tall. And then, with a nice long spine, hinge forward from your hip sockets until they don't hinge anymore. And I'm pointing to where my hip sockets actually are. This is where I'm hinging from. And then when I'm stuck there, then I allow the rest of my torso to release and round. So I'm relaxing the muscle fiber in my torso, letting it round, coming into caterpillar here. If this is too intense on the torso, you can take other things. Got my handy couch cushion here, so I can just stuff it underneath my torso, and I can just rest on the torso. Now, for some of us, there's too much intensity going off in the legs. If you're finding that this is too intense for your legs, come into butterfly. Butterfly is bend your knees, bring them out wide. Bottoms of your feet come together, and then do the forward fold with your knees bent. You're still getting the effect of the forward fold in your torso. But now your legs maybe feel a little bit better about it. But if caterpillar's feeling okay, maybe stay here in caterpillar for a couple more minutes here. Find your edge. Become still. So a Native American tribe that lived right next to the Cheyenne were the Lakota Sioux, and they also had their own stories about the Big Dipper. They saw the Big Dipper as what's known as the funeral bier. They didn't call it a funeral bier, they called it a stretcher. It was basically the carrying device that they carried their deceased brothers and sisters to their graves, to the happy hunting grounds here. And that was seen as the 4 stars in the cup, the dipper of the Big Dipper. The 3 stars in the handle were seen as the mourners. So these were the relatives, these were the friends of the person who had just died. And they were following, they were carrying this funeral bier with them. Interesting story, because there are other cultures in other parts of the world, in Europe and in Asia. There are some cultures that see the same thing. They see the cup part of the dipper as some sort of funeral cart or funeral bier, and they see the 3 stars in the handle as the carriers, as the mourners of the lost soul. So it has a real symbolism of death associated with it. But in the Lakota Sioux tradition, not only does it represent death, but it represents birth. Because they also associate the 4 stars in the handles with a mythological figure known as Blue Woman. And Blue Woman is a midwife. She is their cosmic midwife that Lakota women often call on to help them in childbirth. And she resides, she's not the stars themselves, but she resides in that empty space in the middle of the 4 stars that make the dipper. So that's where Blue Woman lives and works. So interestingly enough, in their tradition, in the Lakota tradition, they see the Big Dipper as both a symbol of death and a symbol of life. This recurring cycle of death and rebirth, which is a natural part of the universe, seen everywhere. And it's no more appropriate symbol than to see it in the sky, in one of the most recognizable organization of stars that almost everyone sees. Because the main point to the Big Dipper, to Ursa Major, to the Great Bear, is the fact that it is pointing us, it is guiding us along this journey of death and rebirth, this cycling. And indeed, symbolically, it does that because it helps us to find direction on this journey. And it helps us find direction because it points directly to the most important and famous star of all. It points to the North Star. It points to the star that never moves. The star in the north, Polaris. Just one more breath here. In caterpillar. Maybe use your hands and your arms. Press them into the floor to lift your torso up. Slowly out of caterpillar. Ho, ho, ho. Grow your torso long. Maybe make a gentle twist. Just to work out the kinks of that forward fold here. And then do whatever kind of wiggles that you need to do. That was the last long-held yin posture. So we're making our way into Shavasana here. So find find any last movements or poses that you would like to do before you make your way into Shavasana. Shavasana is a resting pose, so it's a pose that needs to feel stable and secure so that it can bring about a sense of peace to you. It can be traditional Savasana, which is just lying on your back, arms and legs extended. This is pretty common at the end of a yoga practice here. You can do other things. You can do legs up the wall. You can sit quietly in meditation. I'm going to suggest reclined butterfly pose. And for this pose, I'm going to use a few props. I'm going to grab some blankets and a pillow and just kind of make my own little setup here. This can be comfortable. And notice I'm using very comfortable props for this. I can lay back on the props, so kind of getting my hip up against this first pillow. And then just laying back on this very poofy ramp that I've made. And then my knees are bent. Bring my feet together, and then I'll lower my knees up to either side. Maybe you need more things under your knees, but my knees are fine. So I'm just going to stay like this. Arms are extended alongside. Shoulders are open and drooping on either side. Head and neck are comfortable. So I got the pillow here. And then you can just soften and settle. Final few minutes of practice. So the idea here is to just notice the remaining tension in the body here. Notice the tension in the legs, the hips, the arms. But we're mental beings, so a lot of our tension and stress that we maintain and hold on to exists up in our head. So that's always a good place to focus. Soften your mouth, release your jaw and your tongue. Release the tensions in the insides of your chin and cheeks. Soften the skin around the outside of your mouth. Soften your nose, the skin around each ear. Release the muscle fiber around each eye socket and soften the space in between your eyes. Soften your forehead, your temples, the crown of your head. Release your brain. Give yourself permission to have nothing to do and nowhere to go. Postpone being a human doing. Grant yourself the power to be a human being. And just soften, just settle. Just notice the rise and the fall of your breath. Collarbones are broad. Shoulders released. Relax your right arm, your right palm, and your right fingers. Left arm, left hand, left fingers. Bring your attention to the tips of all of your fingers. And see if you can notice light energy tingling on the tip of each finger. Both hands, left and right. Soften down through the rest of your torso. Relax your rib cage. Soften, release your abdomen. Continue to soften down through your hips, thighs, knees, shins, calves, ankles, heels, soles, and tops of your feet. Release and relax your toes. And bring your attention to the tips of your toes if you can notice that light sense of energy, that prana, life force that exists even down in the tip of each toe. Both feet, left and right. Release, relax, and surrender your body-mind 100%. The title of this poem is Great Aunt. There's wisdom in those lines, who has seen history played out, not on a grand scale, but day to day. She has regained the insight of a child with the experience of a century. A celebrity only to a few, yet her honest gifts are priceless. Her tales are of simple matters, much more important than deep philosophy. She has seen the spectrum of fortunes. She is not a candle in the wind. She's a guide star. Begin to deepen your breath. You can make little motions with fingers and with toes. At some point, move that motion into hands and feet. You can start making gentle motion with arms and legs at some point. Bend both of your knees. When you're feeling ready, gently roll yourself onto one side. When you get there, remember to stay here for a moment to give yourself a big thank you for your efforts in your practice. But also give yourself a big thank you for you, your unique embodiment in this universe. The universe is ecstatically joyful that you're here. And then when you feel ready, bring yourself up into a comfortable seat. Find a stable seat, something that feels rooted. Maybe grow your spine nice and long one last time to have a nice open torso. Bring your hands together at heart center. So I'll end practice with one chanting of Om. You can either join in or just listen to my voice. The inner starlight in me honors the inner starlight in you. Namaste.